A little backstory. My girlfriend and I have been living together for years, and about 2 years ago, we decided to move to a new rental house. The house is in a nice, quiet suburb, on a dead-end street with a huge property. We had met almost all of the locals, and gotten along with them like a house on fire. About 3 months after moving in, my girlfriend decided it was time to make a long-term commitment and huge decision without consulting me, and adopted a 9-month-old dog. Aside from some of my girlfriend's underwear going missing, which we assumed was the dog, she likes jumping up and taking clothes off the line. Things were great. Anyway, I work early mornings, 4 a.m. I come home from work one day, a week after adopting her, to find our new untrained dog had escaped our yard, and was gone. Lovely. I call my girlfriend and tell her what happened. She says she'll be home soon. Meanwhile, I decide to continue walking around, asking the locals if they've seen her, which to my pleasure they have. Unfortunately for us, the last they saw of her, she was heading towards the huge farmland at the end of the street. Great. I head down to the end of the road to see if I can find her, but there's a giant fence in the way, and a trespassers will be shot sign. Naturally, I fear the worst, and decide not to enter. This is when my girlfriend gets home and meets me at the end of the road. She found out who owns the property, and got his number from another neighbor. She calls him, and he tells us to meet him out in front of his house. This place looks completely trashed. The fence is rusty and broken. The bushes are overgrown and taking over. Before we can reach the door, I look in the window and see something really weird. Mannequins. Mannequins everywhere. All wearing lingerie and covered in some red shit. I assume paint, but you never know. We share a glance at each other, and then he shows up out of nowhere. This middle-aged, sunburnt, full-on Aussie farmer shouts at us that he's seen that dog, and to follow him and he'll show us where it is. I didn't really want to follow, but based on the stories some neighbors had told us, he's completely willing and has on more than one occasion shot and nearly killed other people's dogs. So we follow. It's at this stage he starts small talk with my girlfriend, asking how old she was, how long we had been at the house, all questions about her. The questions start to get quite personal when luckily our dog shows up. We grab her, say thanks, and pretty much get the hell out of there. After that, we decided to fix up our fences, buy a dryer to put inside, and avoid that end of the road altogether. A few days later, I get up at 2:30 for work, proceed to get ready, hop in my car, pull out of the carport, and notice a white truck idling on the road outside our house. Wouldn't usually be an issue for me, but this is a quiet road, and I know after 4 months here, no one is up at this time. I turn on my high beams, only to find out it's that same farmer from the property. He immediately drives off. I call my work and tell them I won't be in. I'm not going to leave my girlfriend home alone after that. I park my car out front and stay up all night to make sure he doesn't come back. The same thing happens the next 2 mornings. Same truck, same time, and same shit. He drives off as soon as I hop in my car and turn the lights on. For a couple days after that, nothing happens. Until Monday morning, I get up for work and he's back. At this stage, I've had enough. I lock the house, hop in my car and high beam the shit out of him. He drives off. I dial the police and follow him just long enough to get his license plate number before he loses me doing 80 down our long, bumpy road. I pass all his details on to the police, license plate, car description, and address, and they tell me to go home, to stay there and they will send someone over. I go inside and wake up my girlfriend, tell her what happened and that some officers will be here soon. 10 minutes later, the cops show up at our house. 2 go down the road and park outside his. 1 officer comes in to question us further and make sure we're okay. 1 leaves and the other stays parked out front. Later that day, we're told that they caught that guy doing 120 down the highway, searched his car and found 2 knives, 1 pistol and 1 rifle in the cabin, along with photos of my girlfriend and a pair of her underwear. Needless to say, we were freaked out and filed a restraining order for when he does get out of jail. In hindsight, I wasn't very smart in the situation. I should have called the cops a lot earlier on. But this shit has never happened, so I kinda didn't think either of our lives were at risk. Big mistake. I've definitely learned my lesson.
In the city where I live, there's an old water tower at the top of a hill near one of the parks. The water tower itself hasn't been used for more than 50 years, so it just kind of sits dormant. Let me try to describe what the building looks like. It's sort of a cylinder shape, not unlike a coliseum, and there are tons of alcoves and archways on it. The entire perimeter is surrounded by a fence, and as you would expect, there's also tons of no trespassing signs posted everywhere. There is electricity going to the site, because at night the sodium lights on the building light up. But from the road, they're almost invisible, and that's due to the fact that the entire site is completely surrounded by trees that have grown so thick and tall over the years that from the road, the building itself is almost completely invisible. The place had fascinated me ever since I was a kid. I always told my parents that I wanted to go there and just see what it looked like up close, but they always warned me that it was on private property and that it was clearly marked that you could not enter the site. Since I was just a child at the time, I of course respected my parents' wishes, but that all changed when I turned 20 years old and I was no longer living with my parents. I got the crazy idea one night that I was going to go up to the water tower, jump the fence, and just have a look around. Just kind of explore the property, you know? I want to state right now that I do not condone this type of activity. This behavior is entirely deplorable, and it's also illegal, and you definitely should not do it. And maybe by the time I get to the end of this story, you'll agree 100% with what I'm saying, and you'll understand clearly why I'm saying it. Anyway, I think it was a Wednesday night, or maybe a Thursday night. Not that that really makes a difference, but the reason I chose a midweek night was because I had a feeling that on the weekend, it was highly possible that teenagers would go there to try to drink, thinking that the place was secluded enough that they wouldn't get caught. In my 20-year-old mind, this seemed like sound reasoning, so I took that chance. I guess in a way it was just kind of selfish reasoning. I wanted to enjoy this experience alone, and I didn't want anyone to spoil it for me. And on this particular night, I did exactly what I said I was going to do. I went to the site around 10 o'clock, and I jumped the fence. My first impressions were a bit underwhelming. I don't know what exactly I was hoping to see, but in my mind, I just pictured it being different. Maybe more creepy, maybe better lit. I'm not really sure. I just pictured it being different. The lighting really wasn't that great there. Again, the place was illuminated by sodium lights, but they were old, very yellow and very dim. A few of them were even burned out. The good news about this was that it gave me lots of shadows to hide in. The bad news was, I didn't bring a flashlight with me that night, so I had to be extra careful where I was walking. I didn't want to trip and hurt myself. This was before cell phones became a really popular thing, so if I did get some sort of an injury like a broken leg, I was screwed. I hadn't been on the site for more than 2 or 3 minutes when I started hearing voices. Naturally, the first thing in my mind goes right back to what I said about teenagers looking for a place to drink. I thought maybe they were getting an early start on the weekend or something like that. But the more I listened to the voices, the more I realized that these weren't teenagers. The voices were much deeper, more mature, and had kind of a gravelly tone to them. My best guess was that these people were most likely middle-aged. I probably should have taken that as my cue to get out of there, but I got kind of curious, and I slowly made my way through the shadows to where the voices were coming from. After only a few moments, I could finally see where the voices were coming from. Imagine my surprise when I saw 4 figures standing about 40 feet away from me, inside of the fence line. They were far enough away and speaking quietly enough that I couldn't really understand the extent of their conversation, but I did pick up on a few key words that stood out to me. One of them was the word money, and the other was the word stuff. Even though these four individuals were quite a distance from me, there was just enough lighting that I could see money exchanging hands, as well as some bags. It was at that moment that it hit me that I was witnessing a drug deal. I did my best to stay quiet as I slowly worked my way back to the area that I had jumped the fence. At this point, my heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I started panicking. As soon as I got what I thought was a safe distance from them, I did my best to jump the fence in one clean move, but my shoelace got hooked, causing me to hit the ground with a thud, as well as shake the whole fence. I immediately picked myself up and started running, and what happened next still gives me nightmares. I can hear shouting behind me, and two distinct pops as bullets whiz past me while I'm running. At that age, I was actually a pretty fast runner, so I booked it for home as quickly as I could. I'd like to tell you that I called the police and that they caught these four guys, but that's not what happened. I didn't call the police. I was afraid of getting fined for trespassing, or possibly even arrested. I just thank God that I didn't get killed that night, because the probability of that was extremely high. So here's my advice to anyone that's into things like urban exploration. If it's private property, please just stay out. I absolutely could have gotten in trouble with the law for what I did that night, but I also could have lost my life. I want you to think about that.
So to start, I'm a girl in her early 20s from the rural Midwest. This past deer season, I had a scary experience that I think you would all like to hear. So if you've ever done much hunting, you know that oftentimes you wake up early and head to the tree stand before the sun comes up. And it's not bad waking up that early, because you're generally so stoked to go hunting, you don't even feel that tired. On that morning, I went through my usual routine. Woke up around 4:30, showered with a scent control wash, and dried myself off. Put my clothes on, checked my rifle and loaded it, and was out the door. I had to hike a good ways to get to the stand, and it's slow going, because even though you can't shoot at the deer that early, you still don't want to spook them, so you have to be quiet and walk slowly. I get close, so I turn off my flashlight and start making it to the base of the stand. I thought I heard a branch or two crack, which was a good sign. Also, this tree stand isn't like the metal frame one-seaters. In fact, it's more of a treehouse, a platform with 4 guardrails, so I have room for a nice chair up there. It's still dark and a while before I can shoot, so I lean back and start taking a short nap. I doze off fairly quickly, and I know I'll wake myself up in time for the early morning sun. It must have been 15 minutes or so since I had dozed, when I hear rustling. It's still not shooting time yet, but it's a little tiny bit brighter, so I start looking around. I don't see anything, so I write it off as squirrels. That's when I hear it, a big thud, coming from the base of my tree stand. I was looking out the front at the time, so I spun around to the rear, where my ladder is set. It's still dark, but sure enough, there's a man who I can clearly see on the ladder. I didn't know what to do besides yell, "What the fuck?" and raise my rifle. The guy just stood there, looking at me with wild eyes and messy hair. I was locked in a staring contest with this dude for probably 10 seconds, with my rifle aimed at his chest. At this point, he starts making weird noises, like a mumbling giggle. I've never heard a human make those sounds. I've always told myself if I point a gun at someone, that's when they're going to die. But with all the scenarios I've run in my head, it's always been something like being attacked at knife point, or home invasions where I have my pistol. It felt incredibly odd to be pointing my rifle at a person who was just standing there. Finally, I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" No response. I got a little more aggressive and yelled that he was trespassing, and that this was my property and he had to leave. He took another step up. I warned him, one more and I would shoot. He picked up his foot to take one more step, and I fired. I didn't shoot to hit him. I just couldn't do it. If anyone has been near a 30-06 without hearing protection when it goes off, they'll know it is loud. Even though I was prepared for it, the sound still shook me. Every time I fire without hearing protection, my ears ring for days afterwards. I can only imagine what it did to this guy. Luckily though, out of shock, fear, or a combination of both, he dropped from the ladder. He was rolling on the ground, clutching his head for a few seconds, while I got down and ran through the woods like a maniac. I filed a report and installed more security cameras, but nothing came of it. And I'm sorry to tell you that that is where the story ends.
This happened around 4 years ago when my car had broken down, and I had to walk to work. I was working second shift at the time, and that meant walking home at around midnight every night. This really didn't bother me because the city was fairly safe. I lived in the kind of city where it was routine for the police to go up and down the business districts and check the locks on all the doors. Again, it was an extremely safe city. Almost nothing bad ever happened there. This was late October or early November, and the temperatures were starting to drop. On a couple of occasions when I was walking home, we even had freezing rain. I unfortunately had the bad habit of never properly dressing for the weather, because I never was the kind to plan ahead. So as such, I tried to get home as quickly as possible every night. One night on my way home, it was particularly cold, and I was only wearing a spring jacket. I was getting pretty good at navigating the city on foot at this point. I figured I could save about 15 minutes by cutting through a semi-wooded area. It really didn't seem like a bad idea at the time, and I certainly didn't think it was dangerous for me to do it. I figured worst case scenario would be I'd trip and sprain my ankle or something like that. But again, I was freezing and I just wanted to get home, so the thoughts of anything more dangerous than that really didn't enter my mind. After just a few minutes, I had worked my way through the wooded area, and I could see pavement up ahead, which meant that I had found my way back to the road. My sneakers had barely touched the pavement when I saw headlights approaching. I of course thought nothing of this and continued walking. Within about 45 seconds, I could see that the vehicle that was approaching behind me appeared to be some sort of a tow truck. It was extremely rusty and very old, like something you'd see on a black and white TV show. At first I thought it might be one of the work trucks from one of the local garages. But as it drove past me, I didn't see any decals on the side that I recognized. The truck had gotten about 15 or 20 feet ahead of me when it slammed on its brakes. And I don't mean it slowed down. I mean the truck just came to a dead stop. To be honest, this did make me a little bit nervous, but I tried to ignore it and just continued walking. As I was just about to pass the truck, I saw the driver roll the window down and flick a cigarette butt out onto the road. The driver then stuck his head out the window and called out to me, saying something like,
"Hey you."
I pretended not to hear him and kept walking. And then he hit the horn. My head quickly snapped around and I said, "Yes, can I help you?" The driver then exited the vehicle and walked towards me. When he got within a couple of feet of me, the first thing I noticed was that he stunk. He smelled like booze, and his eyes appeared to be extremely glassy and bloodshot. He looked me dead in the eyes, and then pointed at the area where I exited the tree line. He then said,
"Do you know that you were trespassing?"
I said, "No, I'm sorry, I had no idea." He suddenly looked incredibly angry. He got about 3 inches from my face and said,
"Don't lie to me."
At this point I was completely freaking out. Something about this guy just seemed off, and I had this strange feeling that he wasn't the property owner. My heart was pounding in my chest and I could feel my adrenaline coursing. The sensation was so strong that I thought I might throw up. Without hesitating, I started to run. I got off the road and made my way back for the tree line, when I hear the door of the truck slam shut and the vehicle start to accelerate. I backtracked through the woods and made my way back to one of the city streets. At this point, I was fairly confident that I had lost him. My adrenaline wasn't pumping as badly anymore, and I had calmed down significantly. I started making my way back home, minus the shortcut. I want to tell you that this is where this story ends, but it's not. By the time I was about 3 blocks from home, I see the exact same tow truck come speeding through one of the red lights in front of me and come to a sudden screeching halt not more than 15 feet away. It was like something out of a horror movie. How could this guy possibly know where I was going? There is no way in hell he could have followed me. I kept telling myself that this is not happening. I see this guy exit his truck and start walking towards me. I had just started to run when a police car suddenly pulls up and turns on its lights. Apparently, the officer had been parked in a parking lot across the street to monitor traffic when he saw this guy go through the red light. While the police officer was questioning him, I ran up to him and told him what had happened, that the guy had been following me. I later found out that the guy was under the influence of alcohol as well as narcotics, and that not only did he not own the land that I had crossed through, he didn't even live in that city. He also suffered from some sort of mental illness, and he had a criminal history. I definitely learned my lesson that night. 1. Don't take shortcuts home. It may not end in your favor. 2. Don't trespass. Don't ever. It's honestly not worth it. You never know who you might run into.
Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. I want to thank Fearcrawler for working with me. There's a link to his channel in the description. The other half of this collab is on his channel, so go check it out. Anyways, be good to animals, even people.
Ja. Ja, snämmar, Bergsbus, Rish.
We got the motorcycle from Tron driving by, so that's always good.